Oh no, the subreddit is pissed. Hey everyone, I'm Jason, RuneScape player and overall monetization person. I'm here with a little presentation today on how to fix the current problems and outrage regarding the proposed monetization strategies, and I have titled this, Jagex! Don't fuck this up. You tried. It's fine, I'll fix this. In this presentation I'll be going over everything that you did right, and everything you did wrong, and how to fix, hopefully everything, slowly and responsibly. First off, let's start with where we align. Jagex sold us, the players, on player-first driven development, where the game's core design philosophies are not compromised for corporate profit. At every single point where this is challenged, there is an immediate wave of consequences, the ripple of effects of which are difficult to quantify. This stifles old-school RuneScape's growth and tarnishes Jagex's public reputation beyond the active player base, something that metrics are very hard to actually get more information on. We're here because the core gameplay is fun, and the game respects its players to not try and extract every cent possible from them. Where we diverge. Jagex, under a new holdings company yet again, is exploring the ability to compromise their integrity, selling it as an innovation upgrading. Unfortunately, now, bit of a mid-take here, but business does come first. We do have to take into account actual business viability, but this is not a smart or ethical move. Take into consideration every bit of information that we've gotten from Jagex Limited's actual corporate profits and their record-breaking numbers increasing year over year, and their player base also increasing, breaking records that we didn't even know were possible so many years after the game's actual life cycle has run its course, and we're still here. All further steps to try and extract value from players is going to, without adding, of course, significant additional value, would be more damaging to Jagex profits than their expected outcomes. If you push, you are not going to receive what you want back. But there are alternatives. So first off, we should talk about the value scale. Let's look at each of the actual individual things pitched in this initial survey and see where they lie. First off, we have good. These are things that actively provide value for players. These are the things that are okay. Like, you can do this, and that's a good. That's a thumbs up. The non-value are players that, are changes that we won't really see a lot of value in. Even if they do benefit the players, we're not going to see it, we're not going to feel it. And if the player is in any way, shape, or form asked to pay extra for these things, they're not going to see value in it and they're going to be repulsed by the idea. Then of course we have the bad. These are things that behind a paywall are just actively going to harm the player base. These should be avoided at all costs. So let's start off with the good, because, you know, there's a lot of negativity around right now if you check the subreddit. Let's try and start with the good. Multiple account memberships and additional character discounts. Now, this was actually a good idea. Players who play multiple accounts are incentivized to be more efficient, and players who don't are incentivized to consider alternative ways to play, such as Iron Man, Hardcore Ultimate, Skillers, Group Iron Man Cures, everything. This is an ultimate W. You get more money from players who aren't paying a premium for 3 accounts, and by doing so, give them the ability to play more. It's generally just a good thing as an optional upgrade for people, and yeah, this is a W. You did well with this one. When you initially asked about it, people were excited. This still, by itself, is a good idea. It has potential and it can work. Further down the line, we've got enhanced display name features. Now, this one I'm skeptical of. If this is done in a way where cosmetics are being given that aren't problematic or, you know, a potential problem for gameplay. Like, if they're still readable, if the names are still legible, and the names don't stand out to a significant array where it could be potentially misunderstood for, you know, a position of power like a Jagex moderator and used to scam people, like, if all of that is taken into account and it's done correctly, it has potential to be a nice little harmless cosmetic upgrade. People don't need it, that's okay, the people that want it can pay for it, you make money, they get a pretty little name. It's kind of an everyone wins. The thing that most players are going to be skeptical about is that this is a bit of a slippery slope to further in-game cosmetic microtransactions, and they're going to be scared about that. And somewhat rightfully so, but you can hopefully try and lead by example and do better than that. Regardless, it's an okay potential value proposition for a non-intrusive way to potentially make a little bit of extra money and give the players something that they want, if they want it. It's okay. Next up, community worlds. Now, this is a middle-ish type of value thing. These are only going to be successful if the gateway to accessing them isn't intrusive. There is a hugely successful loop potential there based on the success of other games like Roblox that you can use. Locking these behind additional monetization options and paywalls is going to cause a ripple effect for less players, less worlds, less developers, less experiences, all of which fall onto each other. You need to make this as easy to access as possible for the player base. If this is given freely as a part of the existing membership tiers, it has a lot of potential. But if you try and stifle that potential with short-term monetization gains, you're going to ruin the entire long-term viability of the project. Now, we go on to pausing membership options. This was actually a pretty okay one as well. Not many players are going to see value in it, but it is going to help sometimes. It would heavily incentivize players who are skeptical about getting into a higher tier of membership and, you know, seeing the extra benefit there. Someone who's on a month-to-month thing and cancels sometimes and then comes back, they might be hesitant about, oh, if I buy a 6-month package, I'm not going to get the full value out of it. But, hey, you can pause it for a month. They're going to be like, oh, cool, that's actually really nice. I can take a break and still get the full value out of my membership. Great optional system that people can opt into. It doesn't impact the players who are playing normally, and it can be used by those who wish to use it as a way to get additional value. But overall, it's a good little incentive, and we'll likely end up seeing a lot more players potentially going for these higher level packages, and maybe even not even using the pause membership option. Maybe that's just the incentive they needed to actually take the game, you know, that little bit extra seriously. I think this is one of the things that Jagex wins out more on than the players, but regardless, it's not harming the player base, so we'll still consider it a green. Next up, improved data access and solutions. Now, this one's just starting to hit the meh area. This is something that 99% of the players are going to just not interact with. If I give any normal player that I see in any world right now an API key, what are they going to do with it? Most of them are just going to be like, oh, cool, and post it somewhere else and not do anything with it. A very small, very slight level of players are going to care about this thing. And if you want to argue that what the final 1% of players could do with that would be truly innovative, then monetizing that is going to harm its potential, and all of the benefits that that feature that they would develop could provide to the player base are then null and void. Imagine if you stopped the developer of RuneLite right when he had the idea and went, no, before you think of that, give us money. Would we be where we are today? Would anybody who's made any of the amazing plugins that all of us use every single day have even attempted to do so if you charged them for the ability to? Unlikely. We would not be where we are today if you tried to monetize on other players making the game better for you. That's just an unfortunate reality. If you want to give them API access after signing NDA stuff for security reasons, cool, that works. All the power to you. Don't charge for it. Don't. No. Moving on. Guaranteed transfer of names. Now, this is kind of an okay meh-ish idea. The process being safeguarded would, in theory, be amazing. Most players don't do name changing or name trading or going for any high-level names like that, and expecting players to financially contribute to a safeguard against what is a very well-documented, automated, bot-powered real-world trader, marketplace, that feels like a shakedown. The example I've given in the presentation here is, imagine the cops asking for tips or they don't arrest the guy robbing you. That's kind of what this feels like a little bit for the players. They don't like the idea of your poorly designed system relying on them paying you to fix that designed system. So it's not going to be seen as a very good value proposition for the players. Character name reservations. Now, this is an okay-ish thing, and I had to put 2 points here. On one hand, it seems like the added security of making sure that a name cannot leave your Jagex account is a really nice little safety guard. It makes things feel a lot more permanent. You can have a level of safety knowing that if your account is compromised, you don't have to worry about your name potentially being sold off on a random black market site somewhere. Many also believe, however, that if the security and customer service was strong enough, this wouldn't be a problem. And they are partially right. If community customer support was stronger, this wouldn't be an issue. If security measures were stronger, this wouldn't be an issue. This feels like treating the symptoms rather than the actual core problem itself. It's an okay, depending on where you stand from. Overall, value and additional, work could be put into other places, but this isn't a huge waste by itself. It's just kind of not really a huge return on investment, and probably something that you shouldn't try and monetize. Limitation-based membership. This one is mid. Now, the main problem with this, because the idea of making things more accessible on paper sounds good, but excluding RuneScape 3 from old-school RuneScape, or vice versa, via the memberships, presents a dangerous train of thought that will lead to an equal amount of members and less players in both games, and less revenue. The amount of players that you would gain from having these cheaper options is going to be minuscule compared to the actual damage it will do. Specifically on one end that you may not have actually thought of, player retention. If you're losing a player from one game, they can, with the membership that they already have, jump in and try the other game, and you catch that player again. That's a really cool way to keep players within your ecosystem, keep them paying, keep them playing, keep them being a part of the game, which is a huge problem in the attention economy. If you don't give them that opportunity, if their old school RuneScape membership doesn't work for RuneScape 3, they're probably not going to try RuneScape 3's free-to-play areas. Why would they? They are not getting the benefits from the membership, so they don't have any extra added incentive to try it out. They're going to go play Path of Exile. We've lost one. Hopefully they come back in 6 months, 2 years. There's no guarantee on that. If the average player can't experience both games, they are within the payment options that are available to them, they are much less likely to. This is a bad move, generally. You want to try and make the games as co-accessible as possible with each other and cross-promote them. Make sure that players can be actively playing in both to build extra brand loyalty. But if you make that harder, it's just going to hurt you as a company. That's a bad move. Next up, specialized members worlds. I'm not sure who thought of this. This is kind of a stupid one. Localization is in the games industry an expense that is expected when you're able to support these regions, and charging extra for said localization support is potentially gross extortion, especially when it's done in a subscription base. When you see independent games that aren't making $130 million a year, by the way, putting in a Kickstarter goal for, if I get another $20,000, I'll translate to Chinese, I'll translate to Korean. That's admirable. That's them putting in reasonable expectations for what they can and cannot achieve within their actual game itself. Hosting servers that are locked behind additional levels of monetization is a gross form of extortion. Imagine saying, sorry Southeast Asia, you can't play the way that the US or the UK players do unless you pay extra. It's straight predatory, unfortunately. As for smaller or bigger worlds or clean rap sheet worlds, the value that these provide is going to be extraordinarily low for the average player. You might end up seeing the high-level PVM community migrating to clean worlds to avoid people sniping things, but there are so many other ways that this is already currently being dealt with, like, Discord servers, RuneWatch, things like that. This isn't a solution. Or if it is a very poor solution that is not really beating the things that the community has already come up with to try and solve this for you. Next up, complementary bonds. Now, on paper, the idea of, hey, we're giving you extra free stuff, not actually that bad. The moment that you try and think about it beyond the surface, these bonds are going to be sold off and enter the rest of the ecosystem. If the price of bonds lower, the risk that bots pose, as making bots on suicide bonds is going to be much easier to do if the price of bonds crash, botting becomes more accessible and becomes a bigger problem for the player base. Players are going to suffer if you just give out bonds willy-nilly as a part of subscription packages. Bonds should be entering the game purely through the microtransactions options that you've given, and maybe events and competitions and the like, where they come in sporadically and scattered, occasionally, or players pay for them. That's the system that we've got at the moment. Compromising that system by throwing in huge amounts of inflated numbers onto it is going to be a danger for the company and for the player base. Think very carefully about proceeding with that one. And now it gets worse. Additional account security features. I need to be very clear about this. Players should not be expected to pay extra for what is an industry standard expectation. Pre-verified account recovery. Players should not be expected to pay extra for what is an industry standard and expectation. Enhanced player support? Let me repeat it. Players should not be expected to pay extra for what is... Screw all of this off. Just this. Players should not be expected to pay extra. I'll make it bigger. I need to highlight this. Players should not be expected to pay extra for what is an industry standard and expectation. Your failures in terms of your community service and the way that every player perceives the community service aspect of the game is not something that you should attempt to monetize. Every other company is doing what they can, and most of their reputations are okay. Jagex is not, and you cannot try and hide that behind a paywall. That is going to do more harm than good. Jeez, I can't believe I have to say this. Anyway, that's where we're at with the actual value. Here's something we need to get across. These are the defaults. Players will find monetizing the following aspects directly or indirectly via packages or any form like that entirely predatory. Any attempts to do so are going to cause additional social media outcry, as well as a loss of paying customers and brand loyalty. These are things that are very hard to articulate in actual numbers and quizzes that people do, and the little questionnaires that get sent out. The data that you get there isn't going to properly measure the amount of damage that you've done, because the players that you've burnt aren't going to be filling those out. And the amount of players that you get filling them out isn't going to be a really reliable number either, because that's super variable as well by so many different factors. Anyone that's worked in marketing will tell you this. Player support, account security features, quality of life updates, localization, and the ability to play the game as a paying subscriber should be default. Don't try and charge extra for any of that. Every player will be very upset if you do, and they are. Just note that. Now, we've been a bit bashful here, but let's try and approach this with a bit more of a solution, and let's talk compromise, because Jagex, and by extension, Carlyle, the holdings company that owns them, purchased them last year or 2023, one of the two, they do need to follow capitalism's unrealistic expectation of continued growth and profits every single year. It's the world we live in. Can't escape it. We, as players, can hate on compromises to integrity all day, but instead we should open up a dialogue on a potential compromise. These are things that we can accept as a way for Jagex to increase their monetization, while we as players don't have our core game and its integrity destroyed. Because you can have your cake and eat it too. This was just a step in the wrong direction, so let's focus on the right steps. Starting with the monetization of free players. Now, the free-to-play model is fantastic on paper. You get a lot more people coming in and trying the experience for the first time because there is no monetary barrier of entry. The process of becoming a paid member is, experiencing the free-to-play version, finding the problems and the things that you can't do, and then deciding to jump in after a monetary contribution. That's the process. Non-intrusive advertisements could, when done right, serve as a way to at least, at minimum, alleviate the financial costs of hosting free-to-play servers for non-members playing on non-member worlds. RuneScape ran with ads on a free-to-play server for many, many years, and it kind of worked. There were times where it didn't, but most of the time it went okay. Remember that bots have been rampant and unyielding as a source of hatred from all players. If you want to have effective advertisements that actually serve an actual purpose to the advertisers, you need to make sure that they are less annoying and intrusive by comparison than the bots. Now, there are going to be huge bonus points if you just eliminate chatbots in this process. You need to either make less annoying ads, or destroy the bots. Either or. Balls in your court, Jagex, either one will generally be happy with. Next up, the username transfer safety with bonds. Now, this is just a fun little system I threw together as a bit of a example on ways that you could, ethically, while thinking outside of the box, provide an optional service for players to get involved in, monetizing them while providing a service. Because you can do that if you aim correctly. The black market trading of names preys on name sniping and risky transfers. You could make a system that would provide both the support necessary to circumvent problematic actors and third-party rule-breaking sites, and also monetize the system for not only added security, but also to incentivize bad actors. So let's talk about how this system would work. At the start, a player pays one bond to an NPC in a specific name area to initiate a name transfer. This process alerts the player for the next week that the process is happening, and the player can cancel that at any time to receive that bond back. At the end of that 1 week, if the player still wants to have this name transfer happen, the player picks a new username, which it instantly sets their name to, and receives an item in-game that is the display name in the form of an item. This could be a name tag. So the example I've given here is name tag Zerys. So the actual name of the item would be the name that you were receiving, the actual display name. This item can be traded between players or used on an Iron Man to prompt them to accept it the same way that bonds can be used. Players would redeem this item at an NPC to immediately consume it and change their name to that item. So you use the name tag on the NPC, the name tag goes away, your name is instantly changed to the equivalent of that name tag. You can also circumvent some amazing threats here with some added extra little safety protocols involved. First off, players can't safely initiate a name transfer without waiting the 1 week cooldown, so the thought and idea of names being hijacked has very minimally gone down, because, well, there's still the added risk of name snipers if you do it the old-fashioned way, which you still have the access to do. That is just, unfortunately, a system that in no way, shape or form can be safeguarded, and you run your own risks there. That would include the bad actors and hackers that are attempting to steal these rare usernames. Additionally, you can have an extra thing to prevent hoarding name tags and usernames from players and creating an over-inflated market. Have these name tags have an expiry date between a pretty generous amount, let's say 60 and 120 days, somewhere there, which can be extended by paying additional bonds. If this is not paid after a significant amount of time, those names will generally just, quote, expire and become free for anybody to use, available to the world once more. This will hopefully, if done correctly, should keep names actively traded and lower their prices in competition to avoid extra costs to the sellers. People aren't going to hoard name tags of extremely rare names if there's going to be very little actual value in keeping them. For example, let's say you've got the name Bob. Bob might be worth 3 billion gold. If you have to pay an extra bond every single month or 3 months that name doesn't get sold, you're going to be incentivized to really offload that. Maybe go down to 1.5 billion. Maybe go down to 1 billion. I've put 4 bonds into this thing so far and no one's really jumping onto that. I should probably try and actually off-sell this at some point. The more that you actually make this system easy to opt into, hopefully, more actively traded names will be used and actually placed on the characters by players that actively want to use them, rather than being treated as a commodity by, third-party miscreants and all that. Next up, forget that you saw this. This is my idea, and if you steal it, I'm going to be very upset. But yes, you could call the person, the NPC in charge of this, lay description, because of course everything has to be a pun with Jagex. And hey, I like it. It's kind of fun. Yellow text, black background, let's go. We can make it work, sure. Next up, the multiple account packages. Now, this is the good idea that you had, and I still think that by itself, without any of the extra hoops and whistles, can work. You can use maths and data and value to make this problem solve itself. If that sounds too easy, you're overcomplicating things. Remember, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. If it can't be described in a simple way, then it's too complex of an idea for the average person to get across. So, what is the most easily accessible, average, easy to understand value proposition you could do with the multiple account packages? Well, maths and data. Step 1, find the average number of accounts that players already pay for. You can do this with whatever tools that you currently have access to, using Jagex accounts, player polling, whatever you trust as a way to certify that actual average number. Step 2, create a subscription that is higher slightly than the average number. We'll get to that in a moment. Step 3 is give it a number of accounts higher than that number. The example that I've given here is if the average player is, and of course these numbers are just made up off the top of my head, if the average player has 2.3 accounts that they're members on, make a package that costs the value of 3 memberships in whatever local currency they have, and provide 4 total memberships as part of that package. Overall, that system by itself will do wonders. Players don't have to opt into it. Players that can, will. Players that already spend more than that are going to be heavily incentivized to jump onto that, and by still having a cap on those number of actual accounts, they're potentially incentivized to buy the package twice, which would be absolutely crazy. And that would actually potentially mean more revenue than you're already getting from them. As for the players that play on 1 or 2 accounts, they're going to see this added value as a potential incentive to play the game more, which is, again, in the attention economy, a fantastic thing for brand loyalty, brand recognition, and player retention. Let's say a player can only afford 1 membership. They want to play a hardcore Iron Man, and they want to play a group Iron Man with their friends, but the membership costs are going to get too much. This could be the added incentive that they wanted to actually get those extra memberships. And that's fantastic. And the benefits that that has are exponential. This by itself, if done with maths, can work. Don't tag anything else onto it, and this system by itself is good. This is a W. You've done it. Let the math tell you what the right numbers are, and just follow that isolated by itself. It's all you need. Let's talk about monetizing Project Zerys as well, because this is one that has a lot of potential. Roblox is one of the most successful games that we've ever seen in terms of its actual raw monetization properties. Imagine if old school RuneScape achieved a fraction of these numbers, and hopefully avoided some of the child labour law accusations with some safeguards, which I hope that you do actually include, because child labour is bad. But regardless, there are so many different ways that you can monetize on Project Zerys, and ways that you can further increase its potential overall viability. The server hosting costs. You're going to be getting money from the developers who actually want to make their own experiences and servers. You are making money from people who want to make content for your game. That in itself is already a bet. You've done it. You've cracked the code. That's fantastic. Go with that. Next up, player contributions. Have players that can pay with bonds or rune coins or some third form of currency that you want to introduce, Zerys coins, let's go. They can contribute directly to the server, gaining cosmetics or bonuses decided upon by the server's creator under Jagex's strict approval and standards. You're going to have your own rules here so players aren't doing gambling fronts and real-world trading stuff and, all of that stuff. It's going to be there's going to be rules about what you can and can't charge for in these servers. No one's going to be upset by that. It's the way that Minecraft runs, it's the way that all the other games that monetize player-driven content run. That is industry standard. People are just going to accept that. And then, you rev share with the devs. Now this is where you potentially see the biggest potential impact. If you incentivize high-level creations with rev share incentives and let the community innovate and make the content while you're taking a 40% cut from all of that, or 30 or 50, whatever number you feel comfortable with, and you're still monetizing the server costs, you are making so much potential money from that, all while creating an ecosystem for players to make their own things in. You are the sandbox dealer in that situation, and you have monetized every single part of that process if you do it correctly, while providing players an opportunity to engage in the game that they love in ways that they've never experienced before, and giving extra incentive to the people actually making the game to make something beautiful. You have monetized every part of that process and given the tools to the community. That is the ultimate end goal that Zerys should be looking at. And oh my god, am I excited for if that's the direction people are going with it. Regardless, this is, of course, going to be a little bit later. Project Zerys is still very early in its development, as we all know. But if this is the end goal where it's heading, Jesus Christ, does it have some potential. Now let's talk about the ultimate compromise. Players will draw the line in the sand at different locations. Everybody has different standards for what they will and will not accept. Many do accept the concept of cosmetic-based microtransactions within their games, both free and premium. The idea of pay-to-win microtransactions are treated with a lot less love and acceptance. Let's look at RuneScape 3. It is constantly being praised by new players that are coming to experience the game for its amazing quests design, and its really revolutionary combat, and yet it's still suffering in comparison by standards of what RuneScape Old School is going through. Why is that? Is it the worst game? It's not. It's a legitimately good game that has extraordinarily difficult microtransactions that it needs to navigate in order for the game to actually be playable. It is extraordinarily predatory and very difficult for new players to get through that while they're constantly being bombarded with potential microtransactions. And it's suffering as a result. While many players do accept that cosmetic-only experiences are part of game development, the clear incentive to go hard in the opposite direction has a lot of players worried that they can't trust Jagex to maintain their current quality and quantity of content output and work on additional cosmetic systems, and not move towards anything resembling the predatory gambling systems present within RuneScape 3. If you somehow convince the entire community we want to do paid cosmetics as microtransactions, and it will never go beyond that. If you manage to convince the entire community of that, the majority of the community would be okay with that. We're seeing new cosmetic options coming into the game via things like Leagues and Deadman mode, and these are being widely accepted as pretty cool, and if you made these tradable in the actual game itself, it would be even further cool because players who aren't paying for these items within microtransactions can still reap their actual benefit using in-game currency. That's a system where most people win. If you manage to achieve that while not sacrificing the content output that you are currently doing with everything else, with a standalone team focusing purely on the microtransaction additional cosmetic content, that could work. The thing is, it's going to be very difficult to convince players that that's where you draw the line. Even if that is where we all draw the line, you convincing us that that's where you draw the line is going to be very difficult after what's happened in the past. Approach this line with extreme caution and cross it at your peril. I cannot highlight that enough. It will not go well for you. Even the idea of talking about approaching that line every single time it happens results in immediate community whiplash. You need to be careful about this one. If this is where you want to go, trying to reach this potential ultimate compromise where you're doing cosmetics and only cosmetics as a microtransaction, you could. But convincing everyone that that's where you draw the line is going to be the hardest part. Let's talk about where we converge. Because we do have common interests that we can meet on. Jagex wants to increase its profits and monetization. It's a business. All businesses want that. Players want to play a game that they can trust is going to respect them as players and not make decisions to their detriment with the intention of maximizing profits and milking them. If you don't see a solution, you're not looking hard enough. You can absolutely do both. You do not need to compromise on promises and standards and integrity to maximize the profits by the behest of your overlords. You can do it correctly. And there is one additional change that could be considered to improve and enhance player experience while also increasing monetization options. Yeah? Yeah? I mean, this is a joke, sure, but I do actually have a resume. I'm not just a random person who's talking about games with big words. I work in this field. I'm an expert in what I do. Yeah?